Okay, today we'll turn to Russian organized crime. And you remember one of the central ideas of this class is the relationship between the state and organized crime. We already established that state policies decisively shape the activity of organized crime. The Soviet case that we will discuss today will give a new aspect to this relationship between the state and organized crime, and will strengthen this thesis of the intimate connection between the state of organized crime by looking at the peculiarities of the Soviet system of state socialism that emerged in the 1930s, and the traditional Soviet organized crime that emerged in the same years. And one of the central ideas will be that the type of organized crime depends upon the type of the economic system. Under state socialism, or communism as they called it in the West, we called it socialism here, organized crime takes a different form. But first, let me remind you of the major aspects, major features of the Soviet system as it emerged in the 1930s. You know the Russian history, the revolution of the 1917, then the new economic policy, some kind of transitional phase where the economic policy was changing constantly, but the decisive transition happened at the very end of the 1920s, from 1928-29 onwards, with the invention of the so-called 5-year plans and the policy of industrialization. That's when the Soviet state began to shape the new, very powerful hierarchical bureaucracy. It was based, the Soviet economic system was based on state control over trade and industry. So, in fact, there were two forms of property. One, the state property, which is the state ownership over industrial enterprises, and in the agricultural sector it was called the collective property, коллективная or колхозно-кооперативная. This kolkhoz is the collective farm, which means that the owner of land and of whatever agricultural production and products of this land, the owner is not an individual farmer, but the owner is a collective. The Soviet ideology denied private property as such. The Soviet ideology put collective property and state property it considered it to be a superior form of economic activity. So it didn't admit private property. Instead, there was state property in the industrial sector and collective property in the agricultural sector. Then this economy was a planned economy, which means that instead of the market determining the proportions of exchange, instead of the market sending through prices signals to producers of how much to produce, where to invest, it was the central bureaucracy called the Central Planning Committee. It's in Moscow. It was in Moscow. The Central Planning Committee determined which enterprise produces what amount of which goods every enterprise had to produce, so that it built and mutually accorded all the production chains of the enterprises, as it were, in in one plan. And that was a 5-year plan, which was broken down into 1-year plans, the plans for, and the tasks for each year. So the resources, all the resources were accounted in a kind of matrix and mutually accorded to each other in one developmental plan. The economy was very labor intensive. It was the phase of industrialization when the peasant country, and it was over 70% of peasant population, up to 79% of the peasant population in Russia at that time in the 1920s, was bound to become an industrial country, which meant that the major form of labor, of production, should have become the industrial production rather than agricultural production. Which, in fact, meant that thousands of peasants had to be moved into cities, into new construction sites. So, on the one hand, the 1930s was the time when a very powerful Soviet state with a capital in Moscow was created, because in order to run the socialist economy, to manage socialist economy, one had to have a large class of state managers who were in charge of state property. State managers plus those who did the planning, those who did the supplies, and so forth. So the central bureaucracy was very strong. On the other hand, the movement of peasants into towns caused huge disorder. Former peasants, former communal mechanisms of social control no longer worked, as peasants found themselves in the cities. The problem of disorder was immense. I mean, sometimes historians try to overemphasize the Stalinist order. We tend to look at Stalinism as a kind of, perfectly functioning bureaucratic, brutal bureaucratic machine, which was not the case. It was suffering from the problem of disorder. Crime was endemic. It was both street crime, theft, violent crime, and therefore the Soviet state had to build up a police force, a huge police force and a penitentiary system in order to address the problem of crime. So the system was administratively managed, as opposed to the free market system. Therefore, for the management of the system, one needed a large police apparatus, which would both oversee the use of the state property, which would monitor the use of state property, trying to prevent the abuse of state property, theft, and also address the problem of public order in the cities, as millions of peasants were moved from the countryside to the cities and to the new construction sites, living in barracks and in rather miserable condition. So, but then we have to ask, when the economic system is based on state property, there's no private property, in fact. Well, you can have, of course, your private possessions and so forth. That's fair, but you cannot own an enterprise. You cannot hire people as hired workers. Exploitation, so to speak, was a criminal offense. Speculation, that is, buying it cheap and selling it for a profit, was a criminal offense. So you couldn't do business. It was an entirely different universe. The Soviet system. It was based on the production according to the plan, that everything that was produced belonged to the state, and then from the state people received their salaries, premiums, benefits like healthcare, education, kind of free trips to summer resorts, all sorts of social welfare. Everything was distributed centrally through the state. So what kind of crime would prevail in this type of environment? Any ideas? Well, logically, it would be theft, because in a way, by nationalizing all the asset, the state steals from all the citizens. It kind of nationalizes, appropriates all the property. And people have all the incentive to steal back from the state. Because the state, the collective property, is a kind of nobody's property. So the major type of crime was not extortion, like in, say, in the capitalist market system. It was all sorts of theft, misappropriation of state property, swindling, stealing from the factories. And in order to control this crime, the state had to build the police force. That's why the Soviet system is usually associated with things like Gulag and very large and elaborate network of prisons and camps, which very repressive type of policing, because not because of, you know, Stalin being a paranoid, or, I mean, there are lots of different explanations to this, like Stalin was a paranoid or some kind of traditional Russian mentality. No, it functionally follows from the design of the central administrative economic system. It requires enforcement. It requires police supervision. It requires disciplinary, disciplinary supervision of the behavior of managers. So it is in this time that the famous Gulag, which is translated as the Chief Directorate for Camps, Главное управление лагерей, Chief Directorate for Camps of NKVD, that means People Commissariat of Internal Affairs. This is the equivalent of the Interior Ministry, was created. Another advantage that the system could get from the prison population was the use of cheap labor. So these were not just confinement camps, these were labor camps, and the people were sent to build railways, canals, to mine minerals. So that was the cost and the means of also building industrial power. This is in a way how Stalin and the Soviet government managed to fulfill the task that they set up for themselves in the 1930s, like in 10 years to turn the agricultural country into an industrial country. On the one hand, they were fearing the war, and these fears were well grounded. They had only like 10 years to build the modern industry which could produce tanks, aircraft, and other modern weapons. On the other hand, they were faithful and dedicated to the principles of Marxism-Leninism, of building a socialist economy. So they wanted to make the communist doctrine, the socialist socialist economic doctrine into reality, to build a real economic system based on the socialist principles. But it turned out that things like Gulag, the penitentiary system, was a logical element built into the system once it becomes reality. So networks of, this is, I mean, we've been talking about Gulag because that was the breeding ground of organized crime. That was the breeding ground of the Soviet traditional organized crime. It's there that the crime became organized. It's there in the labor camps, in the Gulag, that criminals took over governing functions. So Soviet organized crime and, say, American organized crime were worlds apart, even though these were the same years, like 1930s, the heyday of American urban gangsters on the other side of the ocean. But, you know, in the Soviet Union, the 1930s was also the golden age of the traditional organized crime, but its pattern was very different. So the networks of labor and correction camps, ITL, as it's called in Russian, Исправительно-трудовой лагерь, there were about 35 camps, mostly in the eastern part of the country. The worst one was here on Kolyma, not far from Magadan, in Magadanskaya Oblast, on the golden mines. There were golden mines, gold mines, and other minerals in Kolyma. I mean, the climate was, it's one of the coldest climate, the adverse conditions, and many of them died, and you couldn't escape. I mean, there was no point of escaping, because, okay, you can escape, you can run away, but if you run away, there's no way you can go, you just died you die in a couple of days. So the camps were built in different parts of the country, in the north, in the east, but most of them were somehow linked to certain industries or industrial sites, like building canals or mining certain minerals. So the peak of the Gulag population was in the 1930s, in the end of 1930s, and in the 50s and early 50s, before the death of Stalin. According to the archival sources, the population of the Gulag was about 2 million people in penal labor camps. 2.5 was probably the maximum, but the turnover was very high. So new people would be convicted and sent to Gulag. Others will serve their sentence and would return to the cities. So the turnover was very high, and during the times of Stalin, somewhere from 6.5 to 10 million people went through the system. That's according to the archival sources. So it's a high proportion of the population had this experience of being there. So it's there in the Gulag that professional crime took roots and were organized. In fact, the population of Gulag of Russian prison camps included roughly like 3 categories, like the general conventional inmates, those who were convicted for conventional crimes but didn't have any kind of specific intention to become professional criminals. Then the political prisoners, those who were convicted for certain political allegedly political crimes, like being in the different political parties, or participating in some kind of religious organizations or other non-Bolshevik organizations, and also the professional criminals. And it's the professional criminals, this category, that will interest us most in this lecture. So they refuse to work. This is one of the major distinctive attributes. While the prison camp population generally had to work every day, the professional criminals, they would refuse to work. They would refuse to work. For this, they would be punished. They would be punished, being placed in a kind of solitary confinement cell with particularly harsh conditions. They will endure, they will withstand the punishment, still refuse to work, and with that they would show their attitude to the Soviet, to the communist authorities, and they would assert their own right to, to live a kind of alternative way of life. And this alternative way of life would be professional crime, of course. So they refused to work. Also, they were much better organized than the rest of the prison population, so they claimed to govern prisons and labor camps. So there was some kind of alternative government inside the prison camps. Again, you can imagine why this happens. On the one hand, there are the official authorities in each prison camps, the administration of the prison camp, the guards, but they are, of course, a minority, and the camp is large. There are barracks, and there's certain, activities going on in the barracks, and those criminals, the professional criminals, they managed order within the barracks. The camp authorities, their power did not reach kind of to inside the barracks. They could govern the perimeter. They could organize penal labor works, but they wouldn't govern everyday life of inmates. So that was the task of professional criminals. There are many words that refer to the professional criminals. I wrote them with English transliteration, not in Russian. They can be called уголовники, урки, блатные, блатари, воры, thieves. These were different words that referred to this subculture and subgroup of professional criminals in the prisons. They spoke their own jargon. And their jargon, the ability to speak this language, particular jargon language, and to understand it, was the criteria of membership, the practical criterion of membership. So if you understand, if you're in, you're part of the subculture. So they spoke a particular jargon, they wore tattoos. They followed certain norms of behavior and maintain a certain discipline and hierarchy. They had privileges. They wouldn't work, and occasionally there were conflicts between the prison authorities and those traditional criminals. But because the traditional criminals, they would, in an organized way, they would resist this, the authorities. They wouldn't work. one could suspect that there is a kind of tacit, implicit contract, as it were, between the prison authorities or the camp authorities and the traditional criminals, that they maintain certain order, but they are kind of granted some kind of privilege of, you know, abstention from work. And they maintain a communal fund, which was called общак, communal fund. So the elite of these professional criminals was called вори, or thieves, or another word for them is thieves-in-law. Thieves-in-law, or вори в законе, it's a particular group. It's a particular group endowed with a kind of legitimate within the confines of the prison, of the penitentiary system, you know, to govern, endowed with a certain authority. Воры в законе. Well, so вор в законе, or законник, thief-in-law, or thief professing the code, is another translation of this term. This is the elite, in a way, elite, a governing elite of the professional criminal underworld. Let's first look at their subculture. Discuss that. I mean, at the first glance, it's a subculture. So these are people whose body is covered with tattoos, who speak a particular language, who have nicknames. They command a kind of let's say an organizational structure. They have aides, they have some kind of deputies, and they have their representatives in different prisons. One of the most important attributes of thieves or thieves-in-law are the tattoos. The tattoos, they are a certain language, a code, which was not, you know, it's only insiders could understand the meaning of tattoos. The tattoos usually contain the biography and the distinctions in the biography of the bearer of the tattoos. They signify the most important episodes of life, some kind of feats and deeds of the bearer. Therefore, it's a kind of, you know, it's multifunctional, but its one function is to be like it's something similar to the, you know, military decorations with ranks and medals, but instead of medals you have them ingrained right on one's body. They cannot be removed, and of course putting them on, unlike, you know, contemporary tattoo culture which is done in the beauty salon, those that were done in the, you know, somewhere in the Siberia or in the far north in a barrack, you know, with a needle and ink, it's a very painful technology. So getting a tattoo is a kind of as a test in itself. So here we have like the tattoos that specifically refer to a thief-in-law or a a criminal who has a very high status and authority in the prison. Well, these are the stars. They're usually put here on the shoulders. 2 stars, they represent a thief in law. This tattoo is also it's usually put in here. It signifies thief in law. So the sword is power. The crown on the head of the snake signifies that this individual, the bearer of the tattoo, have been crowned as the thief in law. The cat here signifies, cat in Russian is kot. Cat, you learn languages, kot, which is an acronym for коренной обитатель тюрьмы, the native inhabitant of the prison. Means. Why the native inhabitant of the prison? That's here we can already see that their world is the real world, the normal world turned upside down. I mean, let's say not normal citizens, but for the majority of citizens, right? Their point of reference in their lives is their, everyday life, not the prison world. I mean, if they are convicted and sent to prison, it's a kind of a misfortune, right? They have to leave this world and spend some time in that world. Now, for these people, it's the other way around. Most of their lives, because they're professional criminals, they spend in this world, in the prison world. And once they serve their prison term, then they get out. Then, of course, what they do, they of course don't work. They start, committing crimes or organizing crimes. Then sooner or later, it's usually a matter of several years, they're arrested and they go back to the prison. So the prison is their kind of native place. And occasionally they go into the outside world. A little more about tattoos. Really, the culture of tattoos is very distinct in this traditional Soviet criminal underworld. In a way, so why the tattoos were so widespread? Why they were so important? Well, there's several different reasons for that. Last year, by the way, in IMARS, we had a student. His name is Eero Wallstad. He's from Finland. He wrote a brilliant MA thesis on criminal tattoos. He's getting a distinction. So he compared. He did an analysis of criminal tattoos and comparing, explaining the functioning of tattoos in the criminal world and then the social world in general, paying particular attention to the traditional Soviet tattoo culture. So why prisoners put on tattoos? Inmates put on tattoos. Several reasons. One reason, for example, is a simple distinction. There's not much way to distinguish yourself. Now look, all of you are dressed differently. You have different colors, you have different, fashions of your dress. You dress differently. There, you don't dress differently. You have the same robe, right? You don't have anything private in the sense through which you can express yourself and your personality. You don't have anything. You don't even have a haircut, because most of them were shaved. So there's not much opportunity for self-expression. And without self-expression, you couldn't, assert your own personality. It's a natural, natural ways of human existence to try to to try to distinguish yourself. So what's left is tattoos, the art of tattoos, through which you decorate your body and thereby you distinguish yourself. You somehow express yourself through tattoos. But it's not, you know, only specific to prison, of course. Then ranking, status. The tattoos, they mark the status of individual. They mark the status of individual with reference to his biography and career. So it's a record. It's a CV in a way. It's an equivalent of the modern CV. So this is the CV, right? So please send us your CV. This is also the mark of identity. The identity of the prisoner and his assertion of his values. For example, you know, many tattoos, well, it's like this one. It's not only a cat, but the cat who shows teeth, showing, you know, animals showing teeth, a skull, right, is a very widespread type of tattoos that communicates rejection. Rejection of official authorities, of the Soviet authorities, rejection of their command. Because in order to assert their own power, they had to, you know, set themselves apart from the power of prison authorities, and they can achieve that through rejecting their commands. So that was expressed in numerous ways in the tattoo language. Many tattoos, they signify some sort of sternness or decisiveness, or religious symbols. They signify, for example, that they believe in God, not in communism. And, you know, the Soviet society was assertively and explicitly atheistic, although, you know, there are arguments that they substituted Christianity for communism as religion, but still. So adherence to traditional religion would mean also rejection of the communist ideology. So things like epaulets here could signify some kind of, you know, some kind of achievements or distinction, you know, maybe killing someone in the prison. The tattoos, there are rules of wearing tattoos. You know, certain tattoos can be put on certain parts of the body. The number of cupolas or domes on the cathedral, they signify the number of years spent in the prison. That's so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think. 8 in this case, right? So 8 in this case of this guy. So this, on the finger tattoos, this signifies the robbery. This, I think, with the crown, it signifies that this, well, he was convicted for robbery. This signifies that he was crowned as the thief in law. This signifies that I will never shake hands with a policeman or meant the representative of the Soviet power. This, for example, would signify the card swindler, the belonging to the professional group of card swindlers. This would be the tattoos worn by the hitman. What else? But besides serving as an instrument of distinction or communicating status, communicating biography, the tattoos also function as a kind of device that, of course, integrates you into the prison society and prevents your reintegration in the normal society. Because, you know, when you engraved the idea of loyalty and, you know, of belonging to the criminal society onto your body, and it's visible, and it's very intimate, because nothing is more intimate than something which is written directly on your body. You cannot take it off. So then it's a kind of social mechanism that reproduces loyalty to the criminal society, prevents you from leaving it and joining the, so to speak, normal society, because normal society then will not accept people with, you know, looking like this. Well, that's just another picture of a more recent one, but it also, you see, signifies, well, these are the kind of stars that that represent the highly authoritative criminal that is dedicated to the idea of traditional crime. Well, women, different pictures representing women are also, for various reasons, were also widespread as part of the tattoo language, like a woman being the cause of a crime committed. This is one of the reasons for drawing a woman on one's body. Now, thieves-in-law, воры в законе, they were the governing authorities, the elite of this of this criminal organization. It's worth looking at them in more detail, because they embody all the principles and the values of this organized criminal system. Now, how does one become a thief-in-law? What does one need to achieve the status of the thief-in-law? It's like, you know, it's like in that world, in some way, it somehow mirrors also the normal world, the world of the state. There's some kind of biography, a career, a CV, which is, you know, looked at when a person is promoted, right? They look at your record. They also look at his record. But they, of course, value different things. The one who becomes the thief-in-law, I mean, I'm talking about this traditional criminal subculture, 1930s and 50s. He had to start his criminal career early enough to show early signs of kind of predisposition or being, you know, selected for this criminal career of professional fitness, in a way. As a matter of fact, in the 1930s, there were very many orphans, because again, you know, after the revolution and social disorder and the crisis of the family, industrialization in general, lack of social control, there were many orphans who just, you know, lived on the street, and they, of course, were engaged in crime. They didn't have their parents. They didn't have parents. So they started committing crimes very early, and many professional criminals, they didn't have a proper family. They were brought up in orphanages, so they would start their criminal career early and get their first prison sentence in 10, 12 years. So in general, the value of prison record was very high, which is directly the opposite of the evaluation in the normal society. If you have many prison records, you don't have a chance for a proper career in normal life. There, the more prison records you have, the better your chances to make a career in the professional crime there. So you have to have many prison terms. But different crimes have different value or different status. Rape, for example, is not very respectable type of crime. Not to mention something like pedophilia or something like that. But robbery, theft, swindling, sometimes murder were the most respected types of crime. So one had to have long and frequent prison terms and kind of respected types of crime. Then you have to show some kind of model behavior. Model behavior in the prison would mean sticking to these norms. First of all, no work for the Soviet state. No record of work for any enterprise or organization in the Soviet Union. No collaboration with state authorities. No membership in any organization in your life record. No service in the army or anywhere. So basically there was a very strict, in this criminal subculture, and especially among the elite called vory v zakonie, there was absolute ban on any collaboration with authorities. No family and no other loyalties, because it was something similar to the mafia families, but organized in a different way. The supreme loyalty, the supreme family for professional criminal, for thief in law, would be the prison brotherhood. And one of the frequent slogans or mottos, principles, also accompanying criminal tattoos, is, for example, "Не забуду мать родную," will never forget my native mother, or the prison is my семья, тюрьма дом родной, the prison is my native home. In fact, they didn't refer to the family in the normal way. They would refer to the family and to the mother being the criminal, the prison brotherhood, emphasizing this loyalty. So no wife, nothing like this. No competing loyalties, no competing social ties, in a way. Then it's a kind of, in a way, thieves in law and the society of the thieves in law, they were very much united as a subculture, united by a certain idea. It's called воровская idea, the idea of the thief's idea. So by ideology. So it's a kind of the power of norms, normative power, rather than the power of violence, for example. Not to mention the power of money, because the money didn't exist at all there. So it's the life for the idea, the one who makes a model career in the system had to be dedicated to the idea of taking care about the brotherhood, the idea of professional crime, the idea, you know, of recruiting other people into professional crime, the idea of opposing and resisting the state. So in a sense, it was a kind of counterculture. It was a kind of counterculture, and thieves in law were in some way similar to the saints of this counterculture. Those who would suffer from in the hands of the state, those who would suffer all the time the severe punishment, those who would withstand this punishment for the sake of what? For the sake of freedom, as they understood it, the freedom to steal, the freedom to do what they want to do, the freedom to, to govern other people contrary to the will of the Soviet authorities. So in a way, it was criminal society, but it was criminal very much with reference to the state. So we see that, the strong state, on the one hand, the strong repressive state, that built these institutions, penitentiary institutions, but in these penitentiary institutions, there emerged this counterculture, the criminal organized crime that was no less strong. That opposed the state. It was, of course, some kind of the means of survival in the harsh conditions of the Soviet prison camps. But also, power generates resistance, and it was a reflection, in a way, the reflection of the state. So the fourth rule is referred to the communal fund. The communal fund, called the общак, from the word общее, something in common, it was the principle of the functioning of the traditional crime. Everything that is obtained through crime, that is stolen, mainly stolen, had to be donated to the communal fund first. And then criminals from the communal fund, they would receive their kind of daily maintenance, in a way, something, they needed for living. This общак, the communal fund, was first of all used to as they called it, gреть зону, to warm up the zone, to support those who are in the prison. So those who were outside of the prison, they would commit criminal activities. So they would steal, they would rob, they would then send food, drugs, alcohol, tea, whatever, to the prison camps. And of course, in the condition of scarcity, in the prison camps, food, alcohol, and even tea. Tea is the hallmark of the prison culture because of a special way of brewing the tea. They would brew 1 pack of tea per glass, and it was called chefir, untranslatable, especially strong tea, and then 1 cup would make you very high, get you very high. So that's the way, the tea was legal. It wasn't forbidden, you can drink tea, but they would brew, it's so very strong. So the tea was like an internal prison currency. By the way, in this picture, I think you can see this black teeth. So if you drink chefir, if you drink this tea, your teeth become almost black. So you can imagine the way these guys look like. It's covered with tattoos, with black teeth, and this is something very, very impressive. Now, crowning or coronation, ritual of acceptance. Once a certain individual, reaches maturity and lives a model life, commands respect, then he can be crowned as a thief in law. So for that, he has to have recommendations from 2 other thieves in law. It's like joining the Communist Party. recommendation to other thieves-in-law, then there must be some kind of gathering at which the achievements and the life of the prospective of the candidate are discussed, and then a decision will be reached, and there would be some kind of, maybe, but it's not compulsory, some kind of oath, and then a special letter would be sent around the prison system confirming that this individual had been crowned as the thief-in-law, and therefore everyone must obey his commands. So disobedience was punished by death. Communication, actually. Communication was very well established in the system. Because there was lots of human trafficking, the circulation of people through this prison system, you know, the inmates, they would write special letters with you know, decision of some criminal authorities, decision of some prison gathering in a certain prison about some common affairs, information about who has been crowned as the thief-in-law, information about, for example, the misbehavior of a certain individual or betrayal, and therefore whoever meets this individual must kill him. So, and then these letters, these notes, called malyavы, they would be sent around the prison system, and then, for example, everyone would, you know and pass this information, you know, from one to another. Therefore, you know, this is how also the power of thieves-in-law, of this organized crime, proliferated. Something more about thieves-in-law. Again, we must understand why did they came into existence and why they were the way they were. In a way, you know, when we look thieves-in-law, we can ask why such a label, воры в законе. And it immediately refers to their main function, adjudication. Thieves-in-law means thief professing the code, or it's a kind of lawyer. Sometimes they were also referred as законник, lawyers. They were kind of lawyers. They were the judges in the system. That means they had to settle disputes, they had to make decisions over conflicts, and they would set rules of behavior. They would control, they enforce these rules. These rules were referred to as понятия, or the notions. This was a kind of common law, the prison common law. There was nothing mystical about that. Понятия or notions, these were rules of how to behave in the prison. How to, first of all, they would refer to professional criminals. This, you know, the major principles are this: no collaboration with authorities, no family. You have to dedicate your life to the idea of freedom of theft, no stealing from общак, because общак, the communal fund, goes to support those who are in the prison. Also some kind of justice, but this justice was not based on the written code. It was based on the kind of inbuilt sense of justice. You know, it's like any common law or traditional law. It's based on the combination of tradition and appeal to some kind of internal idea of justice. And it rested on the skill of the judge, not on the written norms that are somehow related to somebody's behavior, but the skill and the art of interpretation, of law, of passing the judgment. And the supreme judges were thieves-in-law. That's why they're called in such a way. Then they served as a kind of legends and role models. You know, the decision they make, the kind of mythology of their crimes committed, their kind of dedication, their relations with authorities, I mean their conflict with authorities. But also their main function was, as we call it, governance. And the governance was done through gatherings and collective decisions. At the gathering they would decide, you know, many things of how to manage the communal fund, they would pass judgment on the behavior of certain, you know, other members of the community, pass the sentence, they would discuss some conflicts. For example, there was this episode during the Second World War. Maybe there was a very clever move on the part of the Soviet state. So it was the Second World War, which in the Soviet Union is called the Great Patriotic War. So the professional criminals in the prisons, they were given a dilemma. They can be, you can either remain in the prison or you can be released temporarily if you want to go to the front, to the war, if you want to participate in the combat. So each could decide for oneself. So on the one hand, it's a kind of it's an appealing idea to go and to fight. It's somehow, you know, correspondent with the temperament maybe of many of them, and also war, some kind of in the vision of a group like this is some kind of a kind of noble affair, plus booty, plus adventure, plus some kind of the opportunity to display some kind of heroism, and also some kind of freedom. So part of them actually agreed and went to the front. Others stayed. So when then the war ended, they had to return to the prison. But then they returned to the prison, and those who stayed, they said, you collaborated with the authorities. You fought for the communists. You fought for Stalin. Therefore, you are bitches, suki. Therefore, you are traitors. Therefore, we will kill you. But it was not so easy, because they went through the war. They also had their kind of solidarity. So after the war, there was an episode called the Bitches' War, Сучья война, a conflict within the criminal brotherhood. And they exterminated one another over several years. So there were lots of gatherings discussing, you know, what should we do, whether, you know, should we tolerate them, should we forgive them, should we not consider it a misbehavior, a violation of the code or not. So in the end, this war, this Bitches' War, weakened the professional criminal brotherhood, the whole organization, to a huge degree. The management of the communal fund. This was also the task of the thieves-in-law. Again, the function of communal fund is very well understood. You're not afraid to go to the prison. You're not afraid of the prison sentence, because you know that your comrades will take care of you. They will send you, you know, whatever you need, because there's a communal fund to support those who are in the prison. Thieves-in-law were the supreme managers of the communal fund. Now, one video, this video that I will show you first is this is the video about a thief-in-law in the Far East, here in Khabarovsk and Komsomolsk-на-Амуре, in the Khabarovsky Krai. It was filmed in the, I think, in the 1990s. This is his nickname is Jem. His surname is Vasin. He died in 2001 in the prison, allegedly from heart attack as a result of a drug overdose. He was the leading criminal authority of the Far East. He was like in the 1990s. He was a competing governing authority in the city of Komsomolsk-na-Amur. He even had his representatives at schools, for example. If there's a conflict at school, you can go to the director of the school, but you can also go to a special representative of the thief-in-law. So there's just amateur video shot by the criminals themselves at their party, where Jem, Evgeny Vasin, he gives a speech where he says that, I'm the boss, I determine the law here, all the judges obey my orders, and so forth. Just to give you the sense, the image of this.
За что рассказа нашего обязательно. За япончика, за бойца, Сережку, за всех, за Тимура. Ты вижу, рядом ты идешь.
Okay, that's probably the last of the Mohicans, the last big name from this culture of Вор в законе, from the subculture of Вор в законе. His name is Vyacheslav Ivankov, nickname Yaponchik, the little Japanese. He started his criminal career back in the early 1970s in a gang of robbers, for which he got his first sentence. Also practicing extortion in the Soviet kind of shadow economy. That's also one of the new. That's where the Soviet criminal. The Soviet organized crime continued and expanded its activity, after the Second World War in the 70s and 80s, with the emergence of the shadow economy, like again the gambling and antiquarian dealership, then kind of unaccounted production of goods, unaccounted by the state, kind of quasi-private production of goods. So in this shadow sphere, this is more or less the pattern that we know, this black markets and gray, or the shadow economy, which had no regulation by the state, and thieves-in-law took over this function. So he is one of the most authoritative criminals. This picture shows him being released from the prison and being met by his associates. Freedom, freedom. Then he was sentenced in the 1990s in the United States for extortion. He was in the United States, and there was some kind of conflicts between Russian businessmen who resided in the United States. He went to settle these conflicts and to extort money from some of them. Well, that guy appealed to FBI, they made a setup, they recorded his conversations, and they put him in prison, I think for about 8 years, and he spent, you know, yet another prison term in American prison. Then he returned to Russia, and he was assassinated about a year ago. He was assassinated finally about a year ago. But that's the last of the most authoritative classic thieves in law. Now here I just took a quote from his confessions, from his monologue, where he somehow articulates his values. Roughly translated, he says, I hate luxury. I don't need riches, diamonds, private jets, yachts, and other bullshit. I wage a kind of semi-Spartan, meaning ascetic way of life. I can have anything what I need, but I repeat, I don't really need anything. I have alternative values. I have spiritual values. I tolerated too much in my life. For me, the dawn is more valuable than $1 billion. The dawn of the dawn of the day is more valuable than $1 billion. I will somehow, how to translate, eat the stone and feel myself a man of honor in a way, than eat oysters in Champagne and feel myself complete shit. That's more or less the statement of values. I think this is.
Одним из самых охраняемых мест в Москве сегодня стало Ваганьковское кладбище. Там проходят похороны криминального авторитета Вячеслава Иванькова, более известного как Япончик. Он был расстрелян киллером в конце июля. Ряд сложнейших операций ни к чему не привел.
All the Moscow elite was present on his funeral.
Журналистов сейчас не пускают крепким мужчинам в штатском, поясняют, что семья покойного не хочет освещения похорон в СМИ. Пришедшие попрощаться с Иваньковым приносят венки с красноречивыми надписями «От братвы». В большом количестве такие венки наш корреспондент обнаружил у стен храма, где отпевали Япончика. Сотрудников правоохранительных органов на кладбище сегодня очень много. На предмет возможного минирования осмотрел территорию инженерно-саперный отдел ГУВД.
Just the message basically is that his death was a kind of federal event. All the channels were reporting on his funeral. That was something that, you know, a news item that, judging by its extensive reflection in the press, was, you know, for some reason valuable for the whole country. It was paradoxical. And members of the cultural elite in Moscow, they went to the funeral, they were somehow feeling uneasy. But that somehow still tells us that someone who represents some kind of alternative moral values opposing to the state, it's of course some kind of residual from the, you know, from the old days of the standoff between the people and the communist powers. But then he still commands some kind of authority outside of the prison. The reason why I put this quote is again to somehow illustrate the nature of this the Soviet traditional organized crime. Again, just summing up, right? So we looked at the Sicilian organized crime, where it was emerged due to complicated state formation under certain historical circumstances and the rise of capitalist markets. We looked at organized crime in the United States, when it was very much stimulated by the regulation from the state and the the creation of the black markets, of unregulated, unregulated markets, the markets unregulated by the state. We looked at the Yakuza, the Japanese case, the Yakuza being the agent of private ordering. Here, the Soviet traditional crime followed a very different pattern. Although it was also a secret society, it had rituals, it had special marks of belonging, it was also, like any organized crime, an alternative governing authority, an alternative order. But it emerged in a very different historical circumstances within the penitentiary system where it was based. But it also emerged in relation to the state, in opposition to the state, in the conditions of a strong repressive state. But again, in the space that was created by this very state. I mean, the Gulag was created by the state. So the state created the space where organized crime proliferated. And then it created its alternative norms, values, rituals, and rules, and even a kind of quasi-legal system called понятие. But it reflected the Soviet state in the way that the idea and the ideology for them was the supreme thing. Money didn't matter. It was not a capitalist type of crime. It was a kind of very typically socialist and communist type of crime. So that's why we can claim that organized crime reflects the policy of the state itself, and in a way the broader social and economic system. Well, I think that's it for today, but if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them.